Good afternoon, everyone. Josh's Severe Weather, and happy Tuesday afternoon to you. Hope you all have had a great week so far. We are now seeing a break in the tropical activity in the Atlantic after what I think personally has not been a super busy month of August. Ernesto, which has moved away from Bermuda and now moving away from Atlantic Canada, has become non-tropical, and its remains will race across the Atlantic. But we are certainly just getting early into the season, and I do expect as we head towards the very end of this month and especially September, we're going to see a big pickup in the activity across the tropics with several storms on the horizon. This is just one model showing potentially several storms developing during the first week or so of September. Time, of course, between now and then for this to get ironed out, but certainly something we need to be watching. Here's a look at what's out there right now. In the Atlantic, the remains of Ernesto, a post-tropical cyclone racing off to the north and east here, will be impacting Ireland and the British Isles tomorrow night and into the day on Thursday, but weakening as it does so. The Pacific has gotten very active. We now have Tropical Storm Gilma. So the Pacific has had two more storms than the Atlantic, which is a little bit rare for heading into a La Nina, but that's where we're at. But we also have a couple of potential systems to keep an eye on here. And if you're in Hawaii, I think you do need to be watching both of these as well. And in the Western Pacific, we do have a dying depression, which is heading towards the Korean Peninsula, just bringing some rain, not a whole lot of wind with it. But another system that needs to be watched over the Western Indian Ocean, which could eventually come close to the Somalian coastline. And remember, this is winter across the southern hemisphere. So this would be a pretty rare system. So let's take a look at what's going on here across the Atlantic Basin. And you can see on our water vapor image today, we've got a massive trough bringing us some what I call false fall here across the northeast and the mid-eastern part of the country here. This big trough in place, setting much cooler, drier air in for at least a few days. It will start warming back up next week. I know those of you in Florida and on the Gulf Coast are not really feeling this fall approach here. It's a little bit less humid down in here. You can see the drier air settling in, but it's still pretty darn hot. Can't say I'm going to promise you any relief if you're in Texas or the Southwest or Oklahoma. Very hot temperatures continuing over the next several days. Here's the remains of Ernesto racing across our northern branch of our jet stream. Very dry air aloft in its place here across the central Atlantic Ocean and even over into areas off the African coast. And right now our waves are getting suppressed by dry air coming in from the northeast. The waves are coming off in here, and as a result, they're moving into cooler waters, into waters that are less favorable for development. We need to see things tucked away down into here, and we're not really seeing that at least this week. Now, I think that will change as we head into next week. Here's a look at Ernesto racing across the Atlantic, no longer tropical. It did re-strengthen yesterday into a strong Category 1 storm and then began to weaken as it moved past the Avalon Peninsula overnight last night. Here it is moving eastward, and it will get merged by a bigger storm system, or get absorbed by a bigger storm system that will head towards Ireland and the UK here in about 36 hours. In the Gulf of Mexico, we do have a boundary moving southward. We do need to watch these boundaries this time of the year, moving over very warm water with respect to average. But right now, wind shear pretty strong. It's going to take a lot to get anything to form, probably at least another week before we see any kind of feature forming in here. Looking at the Caribbean and especially the Central Atlantic, still pretty quiet right now. You can actually see some pretty stable air in place. These stratus clouds here indicate stability, and these are advancing from northeast to southwest. We've got one wave here. We've got a bit of an upper level feature in here, and everything racing very quickly off from east to west. And a lot of wind shear as well at the lower levels. Very strong easterlies here are going to keep things from developing over the next week. So good news there. We'll see showers in the Caribbean, but nothing like what we had to deal with last week with Ernesto. And finally, looking at the African wave train, we've got a pretty big wave here getting ready to move off the coast. But again, a lot of stable air here and a lot of unfavorable air and unfavorable winds aloft at the lower levels out of the east and in the mid and upper levels out of the east and northeast. So whatever does move off of Africa this week has got a very slight chance of trying to do anything. And really, it's going to be at least another 10 days before anything gets really cranked up at this point. Here's the remains of Ernesto. Here's a bigger low pressure system. The two kind of merge together at this time tomorrow, heading into Ireland and the UK. And then we see a big area of high pressure taking over after that. Now, here's a look at the GFS moving into the future, and you can see these impulses of moisture moving off the coast. We will see some moisture ramping up here in the Gulf over the weekend into next week. Nothing organized, though, at this point. As you look here, you can see the African wave train really does pick up. It's already getting busy now, but we don't have the favorable conditions for anything to form. But take a look at this moisture increase as we head to the end of next week in particular. And this is the point where we've just got to keep an eye on things coming off the coastline. Wave, maybe potential system here, maybe something that slowly forms in here as well. And everything kind of heading, generally speaking, in this direction. Now, there'll be some difference in the detail. Do we get something heading this way, or do we get something at lower latitudes that fights off land and maybe approaches Mexico? And at this point, it's a little bit too soon to make any kind of calls like that. Looking at the UK here with Ernesto, sorry, I was backtracking. Real quick, I just wanted to show you wind speeds that are projected here, 40 to 50 knots, maybe as much as 52 knots in far western Ireland. That's going to be tomorrow evening. And then Isle of Man and Wales could see some gusty winds as well. All right, getting back to the Atlantic. Sorry about that. I put things out of order. It's been a busy week for me. Anyway, we're all human. We all mess up. The other issue that we have to watch for is Saharan dust, which has been extremely high this month. We've had storms form still this month, but not a lot of action coming off of Africa, at least not yet. This is a very active Saharan pattern here that sends this dust into the Atlantic. And it doesn't really look like it's going to let up much next week either. So this is good news for the time being. But eventually it will have to let up. And I do think that does happen. I showed you this GFS moisture chart here, and you can see things are picking up here next week. A lot more moisture in play here coming off of Africa. So regardless if something forms or not, which I do think we will eventually see something form, I find it very hard to believe we won't. We've got a lot more moisture heading in this direction. It's going to be a lot more rainy pattern here across the islands of the Caribbean, across Central America. Jamaica should hopefully get some more rain here. I know you need some there. And also across Mexico, the Gulf region, and South Florida. We are likely heading into a very wet end of the month. If you look at our climate models, you can see that this is what's left of Ernesto, but take a look here at the much above average precipitation expected here next week, coming across the main development region, across the eastern islands, also over the western and southern Gulf. So it's going to be stormy regardless of if something forms, but the trend is certainly not favorable here as we see an uptick in moisture across the Gulf and across Florida and the Northwest Caribbean by the time we get to Labor Day and the following week. And we still have things coming through here as well. So definitely heading in a direction of more action, okay? We do expect that. And the next names on the list are Francine, Gordon, Helene, Isaac, Joyce, and Kirk. I do think we see those storms forming in September and maybe even more than Kirk for the second half of the month. Later in the month of September, it's still pretty wet here across the Gulf, across the southeast coast, across the Bay of Campeche. Maybe not quite as wet coming off of Africa, but near the average. So you get the point here. It's going to stay active here. Another thing that we look at is wind shear, and I had mentioned early in the video here, these reds in here, see my red on red here, indicating much above average wind shear out of the east. At the same time, we have a big trough digging through here, protecting the eastern United States and Florida from any tropical activity. As we move on in the time, though, as we head into next week, it's still going to be pretty much unfavorable, except in this very narrow belt here, around 15 degrees north and up into portions of the northern Caribbean. But take a look at this transition that we head into, and the strong easterlies do die down quite a bit here by the time we get to the main development region, and especially across the Caribbean and the Southwest Atlantic. This is typically our most active time of season. September 11th is the peak. Here we go, the week leading up to that. To see wind shear at or below average over record warm waters is of concern. Now, it's not just wind shear, it's not just water temperature. We've got to have other things in play here, like rising motion, like more instability coming from Africa. But the trend definitely is not looking good here. And as we get farther off into September, and as we head late into September and early October, we still have below average wind shear across much of the Atlantic basin, especially coming off of Africa too at this point. A little bit less action by the end of the month of September, probably over the eastern Atlantic, probably more towards the Caribbean and Gulf, I would expect. Here's a look at what the next 15 days look like on our ensembles. Not much to talk about here, at least through this weekend. As we get into next week, though, we start to see development potential here east of the islands. This is next Tuesday, about a week from today. We also have a couple of features that we do maybe need to keep a close eye on. One is this remnant boundary and maybe some upper level low development that could try to bring us something closer to the surface. Again, the support's not very big, but the areas that we do definitely need to watch are more in here and in here. We start to see things ramping up in about a week or so, and this is that time of the year we need to watch. As we move this along towards the end of the month of September, or August, I should say, beginning of September, there we go, you can see that ensembles are all pretty much loaded for bear here. Action here, action over here, action over here, much busier as we get to about 9 to 10 days from today. So stay tuned is all I have to say at this point. If you look at the control model from the ensemble, from the European, again, not much through this time next week. Then we start to potentially look at our next system developing near or just to the north of the islands. And this particular run takes it closer to Bermuda. Obviously, we don't want to let up on the East Coast or Florida at this point because that could change. GFS model from earlier today really looked crazy. I'll show it to you guys, but I really don't like to forecast off of a 15-day operational run. I don't think that's smart. But you will see things here on the GFS. We've got a system that may try to form and come south here towards Mexico. We've got a system out in here, maybe something popping up near the islands, maybe something popping up south of Bermuda. So potentially 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 systems here as we get to that 1st to 5th day of September. Potentially. This is going to probably change about 84 times. Here's the model run right after it. And you'll see the system that it was trying to bring into the Gulf. It's not really developing, but it is developing the next feature here, which at this point would be something that we probably want to keep an eye on in Bermuda, in the islands, and even on the East Coast in here as well. And again, it's still too far away at this point to get too concerned with, but something we need to watch. And definitely wanted to show you the latest GFS here, which is just trickling in. I have not looked at this until now. I always want to throw a caution label, a warning sign on top of a 15-day forecast, but you can see the GFS, which had a hurricane in the Gulf on September 2nd, no longer does. So we don't know yet. It's just too soon at this point, but we will see more action. The Pacific is seeing that action, by the way, and usually it moves from segment to segment. It was the Western Pacific last week, the Eastern Pacific this week, probably the Atlantic towards the end of next week and beyond. But we do have Tropical Storm Gilma fighting some wind shear right over in here. We've got another area of interest behind it, and we have 2 features ahead of Gilma popping up here over the ITCZ. And that is something, if you're in Hawaii, you definitely want to be watching more closely. Here's Gilma, 50-mile-per-hour storm. Here's the disturbance behind it, has a small chance of developing, but the one ahead of it has a much greater chance. Here's Gilma, likely to become a hurricane in the Pacific, but a fish storm. And then if you look ahead of it, here are the 2 features that we need to watch. Here is Hawaii, by the way. This is the big island of Hawaii, feature 1, feature 2. And it's feature 2 that I think we definitely need to keep an eye on as the track right now certainly is something of concern for Hawaii. And you can see here in the tropical model guidance that's being run till the system forms. This is going to be a little bit unreliable, but a lot of the model guidance a week from today, next Monday night and Tuesday in Hawaii, shows a system moving into the area. And some intensification as well with favorable conditions, maybe a hurricane, maybe even a Category 2 threatening Hawaii. Here's a look at HWRF model guidance, and you can see here by the weekend, a developed system, possibly a hurricane by Saturday night or Sunday, and the HWRF takes it very close to the Big Island here next Sunday. Here's the HAFS tropical model. Kind of shows the same thing, to be honest with you guys here. Hurricane holding its own here, Category 1, maybe Category 2. And this is next Sunday morning, approaching the Big Island later in the day on Sunday. So we need to be watching these, of course, but it's still a little bit too soon to cancel vacations, to change plans, to get freaked out about anything. I don't want anybody freaking out here. I just want you to be aware of what is to come. And when we have a better idea of things, I'll obviously be able to give you more confident forecasting. I appreciate your time today. I hope you guys have had a wonderful week so far. Thank you so much for watching. Please consider becoming a subscriber and a part of my community. I am a meteorologist. I've been serving YouTube since the end of 2022. I've been a meteorologist for over 20 years now, which is kind of crazy. But I want to help others and I want to bless other people. I am a Christian. I give all the honor and glory to God. This is the gift that God has given me to be able to share with you all. And the gift that God has given everybody is hope, whether or not we choose that. I know there was a long time in my life where I had no hope. I was hopeless. I put my trust in people who let me down, in how much money I was making, if I was able to keep a job, and what I looked like. There was a lot of hopelessness. And I know a lot of you folks probably struggle with that. And I know you don't believe what I believe necessarily, and that's okay. I'm not going to judge you on that. But just know that there is something greater out there that can give you hope. Paul tells the church of Rome, Romans 8:24 and 25, for we are saved by hope, but hope that is seen is not hope. For what a man seeth, why doth he yet hope for? But if we hope for that we see, if we hope for that we see not, then do we with patience wait for it. This verse just reminds us that hope requires us to be patient. It's a gift from God, but like any other gift, it needs to be earned. But the great part about this is that our salvation doesn't need to be earned. It is a gift from God, the ability for us to live eternally with God. So we need to trust and wait for what is still unseen to us. We shouldn't hope for something that we already have. We need to patiently wait for it to be fulfilled. And because the Lord sent his son Jesus to die on the cross and then rise again for us to live eternally with him is the hope that I wanted to share with you today. And I pray for you. I pray for everybody that's dealing with these storms. And whether or not you're a believer like I am, that's okay. Just know that I definitely pray over you, and I wish all the best to everybody who comes into my life. You were brought here today for a reason. You matter, and I want you to be encouraged by this message. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I will see you again soon. Take care.